Ever feel like your brain's on autopilot? Just kind of going through the motions, relying on shortcuts.
Yeah, definitely. Like when you're scrolling online and you just click on something without even thinking about it.
Exactly. Or you buy something just because it's on sale, even if you don't really need it.
I'm so guilty of that.
Well, get ready, because today's deep dive is all about the power of shortcuts, but in a fascinating and kind of scary way. We're diving into Robert Cialdini's influence.
Mm.
This book is like a guidebook to the psychology of persuasion.
It's a classic. I remember reading it in college and just being blown away by how much our decisions are influenced by factors we're not even aware of.
Right. And one of the most powerful concepts in the book is this idea of fixed action patterns.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Cialdini uses this example with mother turkeys. It's perfect for explaining this idea.
Okay, so picture this. A mother turkey, totally devoted to her chicks, but researchers figured out how to trigger almost all of her mothering instincts, all with one simple thing.
One sound, actually, right?
Yeah, just a cheap, cheap sound, like from a recording. They played it on a loop, and she totally embraced a stuffed polecat.
A polecat. Come on, that's hilarious. But also kind of disturbing when you think about it.
Totally. I mean, this is their natural enemy, and she falls for this fake chick just because of a sound. It's crazy how that one cue just overrides everything else.
It's like a pre-programmed sequence in her brain.
Yeah.
Cheap, cheap equals protect, no matter what.
So you're saying us humans, we have our own cheap, cheap buttons, these triggers that make us go on autopilot.
Absolutely. We might not fall for a fake bird sound, but Cialdini argues that humans have very similar automatic responses, often triggered by specific cues or even stereotypes.
Okay, so what? Like seeing a guy in a suit and instantly trusting him?
Exactly. Or, even simpler, the word because.
Because what's so powerful about because?
Well, there's this fascinating study where researchers tested this. People were way more likely to let someone cut in line if they just used the word because when they asked.
Even if they gave a totally ridiculous reason.
Even then. It's like that one word just short-circuits our rational thought process, at least for a second. Our brain hears because and thinks, okay, there's a reason. I don't need to think too hard about this.
You know, that actually makes a lot of sense. We're dealing with so much information these days. Our brains are practically begging for these shortcuts.
Oh, 100%. It's efficient, sure, but it also leaves us wide open to, shall we say, clever influence. And that's where things get really interesting.
It's almost like our brains want to be tricked, at least a little bit.
Well, maybe not tricked exactly, but definitely nudged in a certain direction.
Right, nudged. I like that.
And Cialdini points out how much this nudging goes on, especially with things like price and value.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like we were saying a minute ago about things being on sale, we automatically think it must be a good deal.
Right. And it makes sense. Often price can be a helpful clue about quality, especially when we don't have a lot of other information to go on.
So are you saying it's not always true, though?
Well, let's just say it can be a very easily manipulated perception, and Cialdini has this great story about turquoise jewelry, really illustrates this whole idea.
Oh, yeah. That story was hilarious. Tell me you included that in the research.
Oh, absolutely. It's a classic example.
Okay, so for everyone listening, imagine this. You're a jewelry store owner. We've got all this turquoise jewelry, and for some reason, it's just not selling.
Tourist seasons is in full swing, but no one's biting.
Exactly. And she's getting so frustrated, she finally just says, whatever, mark it down, half price, just get rid of it. Writes a note to her assistant.
But here's where it gets good.
Yeah.
The assistant, she misreads the note. Instead of marking it down by half, she accidentally doubles the price.
Doubles the price. So, I mean, what happens next? Do people storm out outraged?
Nope. Quite the opposite, in fact. When the owner gets back to the store, all the turquoise jewelry, completely gone, sold out.
Get out. No way. So she accidentally doubled the price and suddenly everyone wants it. Just proves your point that expensive equals good thing is powerful.
Totally taps into this deep-seated assumption we have. And the best part, this wasn't even an intentional sales tactic. It just goes to show how much our brains rely on these shortcuts, even when they lead us to completely illogical conclusions.
It's kind of funny, though, when you think about it. It's like we almost want to be convinced that something is worth more than it actually is.
Well, it plays into our desire for status, for exclusivity.
Right. If it's more expensive, it must mean I'm more sophisticated, right?
Exactly. And Cialdini has this other example in the book about these two suit salesmen, the Drubeck brothers. These guys had this whole routine.
Oh, right. They pretended to have a hearing problem so they could inflate the price of their suits, right?
Exactly. They'd mishear the price, quote, a higher number, and the customer, thinking they were getting a steal, would jump on it.
It just shows you how easily we can be influenced, even by something as silly as that. It's like all logic goes out the window.
And that's the thing about these shortcuts. They often work on an unconscious level.
So what are we supposed to do? Be suspicious of every price tag we see.
It's not about being suspicious. It's about being aware.
Yeah.
The more we understand these automatic responses, the better equipped we are to at least recognize when they might be influencing us.
You know, it's funny, we've been talking about how we associate a higher price with better quality.
Yeah.
But then there are other times when we do the opposite. Like if someone offers us something for free, we automatically think, well, it can't be that good.
Yeah, that's true. And, you know, there's another psychological principle at play there. The rule of reciprocity.
Reciprocity. Isn't that like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours?
Exactly. It's that deep-seated feeling we have, that obligation to return a favor, even if we didn't ask for it in the first place.
It's like when someone insists on paying for dinner, and you immediately feel like you have to return the gesture, even if you know they make 3 times what you do.
Right. And that feeling, as Cialdini points out, can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Even when it's being strategically used, let's say.
So are you saying we should never accept a free coffee from a colleague? Never let a friend pay for dinner?
Well, I'm not saying that.
Mm.
It's not about becoming cynical and suspicious of everything. It's more about just being aware of how this principle can be used. Cialdini uses the example of the Hare Krishna Society. Really fascinating how they use this.
Oh, yeah. Weren't they known for soliciting donations in airports?
Exactly. And early on, they weren't very successful. People found their traditional chanting and asking for money a little off-putting, you know.
Yeah, I could see that.
So they switched tactics, started giving out free gifts,
Gifts. Like what?
flowers,
Ah.
usually, sometimes a book or a pamphlet, something small, but still a gift.
Ah, okay. I see where you're going with this. Give you something you didn't ask for, then ask for a donation?
Precisely. And it was incredibly effective.
Yeah.
That small gift, it triggered this feeling of obligation in people. Suddenly, they were much more likely to donate, even if they weren't particularly interested in the Hare Krishna Society's beliefs.
It's like that gift creates this weird pressure to reciprocate, right? Like you'd feel guilty if you didn't give something back.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is this principle of reciprocity. It's not just limited to these small-scale interactions. Cialdini tells this amazing story about the Ethiopian Red Cross sending aid to Mexico in 1985.
Wait, really? During the famine in Ethiopia? Wow, that's pretty incredible.
Right. It seems counterintuitive, but it turns out that Mexico had sent aid to Ethiopia 50 years earlier during their conflict with Italy.
50 years. You're kidding.
Even after all that time, the Ethiopian people felt this sense of obligation to repay the favor.
That's amazing. It just shows how deeply ingrained this idea of reciprocity is, even on a global scale.
It does. And it makes you think about how these principles, these seemingly simple rules, are actually woven into the fabric of our social interactions, our relationships, even international relations.
So where does that leave us? How do we navigate a world where these persuasive tactics are everywhere? It feels kind of overwhelming.
It's definitely a lot to take in. But I think the key takeaway here isn't to become completely jaded and suspicious of every interaction.
Right.
It's about awareness. Like Cialdini says, influence at its best is ethically deployed. Once we understand these tactics, how they work, we're better equipped to spot them, and then we get to choose how we respond.
I like that. So it's not about being completely immune to influence. It's about being more conscious of when it's happening.
Exactly. And that awareness, that ability to recognize these subtle influences, it's incredibly empowering.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. Listeners, we've covered a lot of ground today, from those automatic cheap responses to the power of because, to the surprising influence of reciprocity.
And don't forget those turquoise jewelry salespeople.
Oh yeah, the accidental marketing geniuses. But really, I hope this deep dive into Cialdini's work has given you a new perspective on the decisions you make every day.
Absolutely. Because once you understand the why behind the what, you're in a much better position to make choices that are truly your own.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's all for today's deep dive, but keep those brains engaged, and we'll see you next time.